But then it is the focus of today's review, the steel cage match between Don Muraco and Jimmy Snuka. And we need time to assemble the cage, so we get some of the best interviews.
Oh, goodness.
With young Vince McMahon. Under the age of 40, Vince McMahon. I think he would have been maybe 39 around this time. It could have been 38 in 1983. Yeah.
I figured he would have been younger than that.
I'm pretty sure he's 40 when he does WrestleMania 1, I think.
Wow. Okay, so there's plenty of time for me to accomplish plenty with the rest of my life, is what you're saying, John.
Oh, you're doing lots, Sway.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get into like Snuka's part of the interview itself, if you're going back and rewatching this, and I would highly encourage you to at least listen to the interviews here between Jimmy Snuka and Don Muraco. Don't just listen to the wrestlers, listen to Vince McMahon. Okay, listen to the preamble that he gives before delivering the question, and you will ask yourself how this is the same person who is responsible for creating. No, the same person who's responsible for a litany, decades of interviewers now saying, joining me, my guest at this time, such and such. How do you feel about getting attacked today? Like some bullshit question like that. And compared to the world of difference in Vince, setting the scene beautifully here, talking about thousands of fans screaming here, Madison Square Garden, you're about to enter the most grueling match there is, the steel cage. Like, he does a masterful job of painting the picture of what we're about to enter. And I just don't understand how like his style of broadcasting would devolve so much for the people that he would employ later on.
There is such an interesting character study into Vince McMahon to analyze the contradictions of of Vince McMahon, the producer, versus Vince McMahon, the performer. Like, here is somebody that made it a mandate of wanting his announcers to be bland, less over the top. He wanted to get away from someone like Jim Ross. He wanted, and you saw like kind of the style they wanted. And here is somebody that as a play-by-play announcer was as over the top and at a 10 as anybody for those big dramatic moments. And yeah, here is another example of that. Like, Jimmy Snuka, in a few short hours, you are going to be walking into the 8 feet steel cage match where there is going to be blood shed and anger distributed at Madison Square Garden. Can you take us into your headset?
Beautifully done. Yeah, like I was really taken aback by just Vince's performance here himself.
So he questions Jimmy Snuka, who is just about ready to walk out into the arena. The most bitter feud in pro wrestling with millions watching. Very intense here. And Jimmy Snuka, just referring to him as Vinny. And he just looks into the camera. Another faux pas that modern talent was, don't look into the camera. So he stares into Don Muraco's soul. Don Muraco, you know what you did, brother. You know what you did. And he will never forget, brother. Steel cage is for true animals. Dude, he was so intense here. He can break any body part. He tears off his shirt. You brought the animal and the charisma out of me. I don't know what the fuck that means. The cage of all, brother, of all hell. And Vince wishes him the best of luck. Now, I will say, a Jimmy Snuka promo, if you read it on a page, like jumbled garbage that it's just a syntax nightmare. It's incoherent. You need to hit translate, okay, to make any sense of it.
You need Grammarly on that.
But I will state, I watched this. This was one of the most intense promos that I'm watching this. I cannot wait to see what this man is going to do inside of this steel cage match. This was a phenomenal promo. If you want to get Jimmy Snuka, this is it in 2 minutes.
It was way better than I was expecting, given maybe some of the stuff we had seen, the quality of the wrestling on this show. But this was the point in the show where I think I fully realized that, like, as much as we might lament like the style of wrestling compared to today, the promos, arguably, maybe in terms of consistency, might have been even like, like it's hard to reach. This type of level is pretty timeless. I thought Jimmy, maybe this kind of speaks to like, who the person was later ultimately remembered as. I found it really creepy, and especially some of the words,
Yeah, and we'll for the timeline, everybody, like this is October of 1983, and the death of Nancy Argentino is earlier this year, so that has happened, and that's something that we'll cover after. But I mean, that's certainly a massive part of Jimmy Snuka's legacy. But that's happened this year.
As always, like on these sort of retro shows, like we always as critics have to kind of like have to balance sort of like our review of the work with our thoughts of the people, and we're here to talk about arguably like the most well-remembered moment of Jimmy Snuka's career, and a lot of that is going to be a positive conversation, but it in no way reflects, I think, our opinion of him as a person, more only of the work. So
you know what?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to read this now. I was going to do it after the match, but this was what Mick Foley wrote about this match, because he addresses those issues too. There's no one, I think, attached to this match more than Mick Foley, because, this was broadcast on Raw during those sit downs with Jim Ross of how influential this match was on Mick Foley, where they isolate him in the crowd cheering this on. So this was written by Mick Foley in January of 2017. And he had posted an image of Jimmy Snuka on top of the cage before he dives, and writes, "Had it not been for this moment in time in October 1983, it's highly unlikely that I would have created any moments at all within the world of professional wrestling / sports entertainment. Jimmy Snuka created that moment for me, a moment that was about so much more than just an athletic dive from the top of a cage. It was professional wrestling as art, and Snuka that night was the consummate artist, painting on his own unique canvas in the most famous arena in the world. He painted with his body language, his intensity, his facial expressions, especially with those eyes, so that the slightest glance to the top of the cage created a literal buzz among the 20,000 in attendance, like a fuse being lit, leading to a powder keg of anticipation, resulting in the rarest of explosions. A crowd pop so loud and emotional that all I need to do is close my eyes and I can hear it all over again, as real to me now as it was that night at the Garden over 30 years ago. I'm struggling with both the news." Okay, this was right after Jimmy Snuka's passing. "I'm struggling with both the news of Jimmy's death and the knowledge that he may have been responsible for the death of a young woman in his motel room in May of 1983. Unfortunately, that death is inextricably entwined in the life and story of Jimmy Superfly Snuka, making the celebration of his life and career so much more difficult. I've been asked many times to comment on the matter, but haven't until now, simply because I didn't know what to say. I still don't. I hope that the final judgment of Jimmy Snuka will take into account the kindness with which he treated both fans and friends, and the love he had for family and close friends. But Jimmy will likely be remembered as much for what allegedly took place on that one terrible night as he will be for his magnificent career. I don't know how to reconcile this man's heroic feats inside our world with the tragedy he likely played a role in outside of it. But I have always found wisdom and comfort in these words from Bruce Springsteen. Trust the art, not the artist. Art, as its best, inspires others to be something more than they could otherwise be. Spiritualist Thomas Merton famously wrote that, quote, art allows us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. The masterpiece that Jimmy Snuka created that night at Madison Square Garden ultimately allowed me to do both of those things. I would be a different man without the influence of Jimmy, a man without a dream, a man you likely would never have seen on your television screen. I remember vividly standing in awe at MSG that night, hoping that one day I could do something that might make others feel the type of emotion I felt at that very moment. He was a true artist who inspired others to create moments that might stand the test of time, moments that might be remembered for years, decades, even a lifetime. Thank you, Jimmy Snuka, for inspiring me."
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can ask anybody to put those like very complicated feelings and thoughts into words than multi-time New York Times bestselling author, beautifully put there by Mick Foley. And I think a great constant reminder for us that are consumers of any sort of media is that we I think it's great to like put the work on a pedestal, but I don't think we should put people on the pedestal, everybody has faults, and of which this man, I mean, that would be an understatement, when speaking about Jimmy Snuka here.
And I also give credit to a lot of, this is right after Jimmy Snuka's death that he writes this, that it's very easy, I think, for a lot of people to just focus on all the positives of someone. And it's just like we have amnesia when it comes to the negatives, and to call that out. I mean, it's not the same comparison, but look at how professional wrestlers have just wrote their tributes about like Vince McMahon. It's like, it's all on the positive, and it's almost as though like the scandal part doesn't exist. It's Vince McMahon, congratulations. And it's just the positive and none of the negative. And I don't think that you can truly tell the accurate story unless it's both. And with Jimmy Snuka, like there is no avoiding like what was there, and what like the Allentown Morning Call, like what they investigated and discovered as well. Like there is, that huge aspect that will always surround Jimmy Snuka. But this is probably the most famous match of his career, and it covers a lot of ground when you look at his time in the US, in Japan. This is one that, and partially because of where it happened in the WWF, and through people like Mick Foley and the company that has showcased this match and this moment throughout their years in various videos and highlights. It's one that, you have a better chance of, a match that is nearly 40 years old standing the test of time when you have, it happened in a WWF ring that is, focuses on its history.
Well, for me, like I personally don't know if if WWE themselves would be celebrating it as much, if not for Mick Foley. Like that was the first time I heard about this match, John. If it wasn't for Foley bringing it up, and I don't know, the Dude Love, like, videos of him diving off his roof, sort of crossfaded, from this particular scene influencing him. I mean, it just seems
Foley had a huge reason for this moment lasting so long. Yeah.
Right. And that's why he's so associated with the match. But I mean, to me, it's just it's so unlike, Vince to celebrate anything pre-Hogan that it's a great question of whether or not we'd still be talking about this match if not for Foley.
So they make their way out, and we had been talking about this.
We also had a Buddy Rogers interview, but
you're right. You're right. We went past that. So we hear from, we skipped over a lot here. So we heard from Snuka, and then Buddy Rogers is with Vince McMahon, and he calls Don Muraco. Buddy Rogers is the manager for Jimmy Snuka, and he calls Muraco one of the greatest wrestlers, but knows deep down that Jimmy can beat him. It's do or die. He quotes Joe Louis. I mean, just to me, it was like, he was talking to like the head trainer here as his man is about to go into battle.
I swear, I really love this production. I understand it's a limitation of just time, having to set up a cage physically, because this was before they were lowering cages off a ceiling. So like they had to like a GCW show, basically they had to like erect every single panel one by one. And that took a lot of time. But what it provided was an opportunity for the broadcast to build up this match via these excellent interviews, and just the length of time that we're spending talking about the structure itself made me anticipate this match so much more. And you had excellent interviews like this one from Buddy Rogers talking about these two entering this cage match as if they were about to enter Afghanistan. Like it felt like they were about to like fight to the death here. No, like one person, maybe neither, would have escaped this, alive afterwards. But it was the calmness of like the setting backstage with Vince kind of like, again, this was like stylistically, I look at these promos and they were very different from, I think, obviously the Hogan era where everybody seems to be screaming into the microphone. These in contrast were very calm. I don't know if you can hear the screaming in the background here, John, but I got a bit of screaming on.
I got an 80s modern day steel cage build up in the background.
Yeah. But it's I found this so much more believable and in a way far more chilling, to hear guys speak calmly, somber, as if like they're about to witness like something terrible about to take place in the steel cage.
Yeah, if you want a lesson on why steel cages mattered so much in this era, this is a perfect lesson to learn from. And then the final word goes to Don Muraco with his Intercontinental title, the most cocky champion Look
Jeez.
at this guy, just with a roll of tape around his finger. That look, this guy is so like underrated for his like heel mannerisms and this time period that he was just phenomenal. He says he's got everyone riled up. Everything's done. I live as a champion. I eat and breathe as a champion. So what? I've got 22,000 people that hate me. I'm the best. Snuka better be warmed up and loose. This is our playground in the Big Apple where the whole world revolves. And he knows he's the most hated man in this entire arena. And I don't give a shit. This guy was awesome.
The best promo of the show. And that's really saying something. This was kind of really my first exposure to like hearing a Don Muraco promo, and he immediately won me over with this like cocky, relaxed attitude and very smooth and organic delivery. Like he read this, and I would have been convinced that this was like a scripted show that required several takes to get a delivery and wording this smooth. From a highly trained actor, I would believe. Like he just evokes so much, I think, personality in without like raising a voice, without like doing anything like relying on like catchphrases, like no tricks, just like pure personality. And it felt so effortless. So again, like we may disparage some of the in-ring on this show like 40 years later, but these promos absolutely hold up and in many cases outshine so much of what we continue to see today.
And, we were discussing this about, like Rampage and stuff like that. And, we sometimes talk about like the format where it just seems like match to match to match to match. Mm-hmm. And, you cannot do this on a weekly basis, but I really think like you can take a lesson here that when you have that big match and to just dedicate, it's like, okay, we're going to have a quarter where half of it is going to be dedicated to this. And yeah, it's not in-ring action, and it might even hurt. The audience might dip down during promos, but for those that stick with it, it is going to build up the anticipation for this match. Like it was the format that made Ultimate Fighter really strong is because for 45 minutes, you built up towards this fight, and then you got the fight at the final 15 minutes of the show. But the whole show was edited around these two fighters. We're going to end up, we have some conflict in the house, then they get chosen for the fight, then they're getting into fight mode with one another, and boom, we're going to get the payoff at the end. And I think that is something you can absolutely experiment with on Rampage, which is a show that should be open to experiments to the typical presentation.
I think maybe you can make the argument that like Rampage has maybe a little bit more to lose than like a YouTube show, for instance. Like I would argue that a YouTube show would be like the perfect ground. But although like it's production like this kind of takes maybe like for a modern sense probably takes a bit more money and like time to create, but like you can argue that Rampage is at a stage where it has to maintain a certain rating just to kind of, garner like results for the broadcaster. But I'll say like, in all this talk about like non-scripted programming that might be, coming to AEW's way or in their relationship with Warner and Discovery. I like, we talk about like maybe a potential idea for Ring of Honor or like, more shoulder programming for AEW. If it's going to be somewhat reality based, I think that would be a terrific idea to try to like focus on one match and one match only at the end of the show, but using the rest of the show to build up the story, to build up the grudge in however way you want, just to get people interested in that one final match at the end. I would like ultimately we've been complaining about this for a long, long time now. And it's that like Rampage especially, needs time to build stories, to build anticipation, to get people interested in the result of the match beyond just seeing in-ring action. So, man, this was a wonderful example of when it works really well.
Yeah, I just think this is a big example of it. But if you were just to tune in and watch this match from the beginning bell and to the closing bell, even including the dive, to me, it's like, you miss out so much if you don't include these 5 minutes of promos to precede them. They add so much. And these are like the 15 minutes of this show that I would highly recommend everyone go out and check from the promo to the splash.
And pay attention to Vince McMahon, who I thought really was tremendous. Again, in the laying out of every single one of these questions, we failed to mention, but in the Snuka promo, he starts shaking the microphone, and Snuka comments on it. Yeah, you shake that microphone, brother. Like Vince, maybe we can kind of comment on how much he was taking the focus away from like the actual interviewer. But I thought it added to it. Like the interviewer himself looked scared.
Like you left the viewer with the feeling that like this is serious. There is something dangerous that's going to happen in this match. And you could see like the steel cage, like you hear today when people will say a cage match, it's like, oh, and you can't do blood. Like it's a throwback to this era when it meant this was a violent match and people were going to get hurt. Like that's what the cage meant when you brought it out. And it was going to be like, this is the end of the road for this feud. This is where it gets settled. So Don Muraco is out with Captain Lou Albano, and he is defending the Intercontinental